Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we're doing part 15 of the 3-pound robot build. The last video we did on this, I believe, was printing a solid frame rail for the other side, which we installed, and it didn't increase the weight too much, which was nice. And then I started doing the same thing for the second side. Let me see. And I did. I printed out a solid one of this. And then I looked at all of the drilling holes and tapping holes that I had to do for this piece. And I decided I needed to make a decision to move forward on either machining this out of metal, which my mill is down, unfortunately, or designing it better for being 3D printed in something. So I did that, and I did this, which, as you can see, it has a lot of rectangles, and those are all slots for nuts to go in and secure the M6 screws through the plates. Unfortunately, I was playing around with my settings for the printer, and instead of having my fan off for this, I had my fan on, and as you can see, after about the first third of the print, it started peeling away from my bed plate. Oh well, no big deal. Then I redesigned it further since I had to reprint it anyway. And I was tweaking other settings in my printer because I had just watched a video and they were talking about the print setting lift on retraction and how it usually causes more problems than it solves. I had had good results with that when my printer was more standard, but now that I print with a 0.8 millimeter nozzle, you can kind of see what happens with that. The bigger nozzle kind of globs a little bit too much, so you can't really stop little protrusions from happening on the surface, and if the head doesn't lift up enough to go over those, it hits them and it kind of resets where the printer thinks the coordinates are, and you get a layer shift. So these were useless, but I managed to use up most of that roll of PETG, and I have another roll of TPU now, which I'm going to load onto this spool. If you haven't checked out my video on making your own little airtight spool holders, do that. So we already have the design. We just need to load the spool and print both sides, actually. We got my favorite high-speed grass green TPU. There's a link in the description if you want to check it out. Don't forget to check out my video on making one of these little enclosures with a few parts that I have links for, and a link for the file to make this little extra stand if you need it. The only thing I don't like about Overture Filament is the spool. The cardboard spool, if you don't have something with bearings on it, it rubs a little bit. Hasn't really caused any major issues for me, but your mileage may vary. Check the monitor there. Although do your research on whether desiccant is enough. For most of these filaments, I think it is, but for nylon, I think I kind of doubt it. There we go. Now I have to turn my printer on, heat up the hot end. Not necessarily super hot, but hot enough to soften the plastic, Then I can pull out my PETG that I just loaded in there, and then I can thread in my TPU. My Bowden setup, it is about 3 feet of tube, so it takes a little while, and I have relocated my extruder on this printer to right there. Do it. About 130 right now. Looks like a few here. Which it helps if you have a straight end, which this is not. Try to get past all the kinks. Got it. There's a few all over. You could have the extruder do this. I just have to extrude a lot of filament, but it's much faster just to feed it in yourself. And then you can feel when you're actually at the end. Or you can also kind of see it through the opaque tubing. Alright, that should be it. Let's try to extrude some. We'll heat you up a little more. Extrude. 10 millimeters slow. Oh man. There we go. It's extruding the black PETG still. So we'll just extrude a few times. You can load it up. See a little bit of grass green and back to black. Takes a little while to flush it through. It's getting greener. As you can see, I may have gone a little crazy printing robot parts. No big deal though. Let's take a look at some of these. These are all the frame rails for my robot. These two are the motor side, and these three are the motor side, and these four are the non-motor side. Of course, this is what I've been rocking. This is still what the motor side over here is. It's clear PETG that I drilled and tapped because it was planned to get made out of aluminum, but I think I'm just gonna try something else. So we come down to this one where I designed little nut captures so I can use the same screws basically, maybe slightly longer, and pop nuts in there, and overall it'll still be lighter than aluminum. However, now it's very bendy because this is TPU, which is definitely of some benefit when facing high energy weapons. The question is, how bendy is too bendy that is going to get ripped apart? I guess we'll find out. One thing you might notice on this, there's a few issues, and that is that there's some gaps here. That is an artifact of the slicer I'm using, and because on this model, and a lot of times, I lock my nozzle extrusion diameter to the same as my nozzle diameter. And if the distance isn't right and you can't extrude a small enough or big enough piece, you get these gaps sometimes, which is annoying, but you know, depending on your slicer, it might not be an issue. I should say big nozzle problems. So this is the same part, but with automatic extrusion diameter turned on. So some of these are bigger, some of them are smaller. You can see this bottom section is literally one extrusion, whereas on this piece it's actually two, and it's connected. So this one has its own issues, as well as it didn't quite make it around the circle for whatever reason. Again, slicer issues. This all could be fixed if you're using a more advanced slicer, I suppose. And then I did a motor side version. And as you can see, we've kind of fixed the issue by increasing this bottom distance here, changing it a little bit. I moved the nut holes slightly so we don't end up with gaps like we did there. And that works out pretty well. However, in printing this one and these versions here, you'll notice I kind of elongated this pocket, partially to do weight savings on aluminum, but it's kind of still in this design. And I realized that, well, this might not be as rigid as if I did like an old style version and had solid pieces here. Of course, then I ran into, again, the issue of the width of this section and my nozzle diameter, so I have a gap in the middle. And it looks like I'm under extruding a little bit with TPU, which is probably not uncommon when you have a cardboard spool and a 3-foot Bowden tube. But I think it's worth testing. So since these are extras and these are ones I could use, I kind of want to strap these to something and hit them with hammers, to be honest with you, and see the failure modes, see what happens, you know? See some destruction. Let's try that. All right, I made up a little test jig. It's going to hold a side rail, and it's going to take a little handy sledge. We'll see how this goes. If you notice something different about the robot, good for you, good eye. There's a video up on my Patreon page. I think I have 3 videos so far on Patreon. So if you'd like to buy me a cup of coffee, head on over to Patreon, you get to watch them all. Please like, subscribe, and I hope you enjoyed.